Welcome to the SDK and API video tutorial. In this tutorial, we'll get you up and running with our software development kit. This means that you can fork the entire solution on GitHub and create a customized product for your customers. We're also going to talk about the local database called MSDB. Once your user authenticates against the backend media server, all of the information, the entire database of that user is actually hosted within the JavaScript client inside the browser. So this local database is called MSDB. So we'll cover that. And last but not least, we're going to talk about our Jalapeno SDK. With Jalapeno, we've basically developed a very simple to use library, so you don't really have to worry about parsing the MSDB, because in order for you to use MSDB, you really have to understand the database structure and really understand where everything comes together. But with the helper library of the SDK called Jalapeno, you really can just run functions that we've developed for you, and essentially these are just wrappers for MSDB. So we'll cover the helper library SDK Jalapeno as well. So with that, let's go ahead and begin. So here we're looking at our editor, which is IntelliJ. We highly recommend that you use either IntelliJ or WebStorm. They're both really nice applications that allow you to debug in real time, a lot of refactoring capabilities, and best of all, it has GitHub integration as well, so you can easily integrate with GitHub. And so if you're serious about development, this will be the tool to use. So the first file we're going to look at is our StudioLite.html. This is the wrapper application for the actual application for Studio Lite. And so when you load Studio Lite, this is the actual HTML file that loads. And you can see over here there's a call to HTTPS and then Signage Studio SDK. You don't have to look at the source code, you don't have to worry about this file. This is the actual really just a raw API that we use. So this file actually includes over 100 other files that are included inside this JS. And again, just know that you have to include it, but you don't really have to worry about it. We also include our Bootstrap, because we do use Bootstrap for progressive layout. And we have our styling sheet right over here. So all the changes like the logos, and if you wanted to brand the solution, that's actually where you would do it through the CSS. So that would be right there. And over here we have require.js. This is because our application is modulated. We only load the modules we need when we need them. So require.js is right here. And you can see that the first file that require.js loads is init. So this is where things really kick off through the init. And now we can switch into our init. Here inside our init application, we can see that we have a whole bunch of files that we include. These are all modules. And we're not going to go through all of them, but some of the names I think would be familiar to you. I should mention now that if you're going to develop with our SDK, you should be very familiar with our studio and just the way that things are set up inside the Signage Studio Pro version. You should be familiar with timelines and channels and screen divisions and layouts and campaigns, because if you don't, it'll be very difficult to develop. So it is very important that you understand just as a regular user how everything is set up in the Signage Studio. So just looking again at this list, you can see that we have things like our campaign. We have things like our orientation selector, resolution selector. This is the sequencer. So just by looking at the names, if you're familiar with the Signage Studio, a lot of these names are going to be familiar, and they'll make sense. Block QR, that's a QR component. This is a block image. That's where you put on the timeline, you would put a block image. So again, I'd recommend just going to the list and just kind of understanding which files we actually load. Of course, a lot of these files you're not going to have to worry about, but it's just good to understand just the overall structure of the application. So the only thing that we really want to look at and pay attention to is over here when the actual file loads, it actually does a new on this class right here, Studio Lite. So let's go ahead and switch into our Studio Lite. And so you can see it right here under StudioLite.js. And over here we are using Backbone as our main framework. So you can see that we have a whole bunch of services and const objects that we declare. And we have our Jalapeno. You can see right here that we have a Jalapeno helper. We're going to explain to you in a second how that works. But again, this is just all pretty raw stuff. And then we load our main file, layout router. And what Layout Router does is really just process the authentication for user authentication, and it actually creates the routes. So the application switches pages from one page to the next after the authentication. Studio Lite is a SPA application, meaning that it's a single page application, so we don't actually navigate pages. It's always within a single page. We actually use a really cool library that we developed called Stack View, that allows you to switch views, and it is part of, or I should say, it requires Backbone, but this is something that you guys can check out. So go back to our main file, Studio Lite. You can see here that we instantiate Layout Router. So let's go into Layout Router and check it out. So that's under Controllers, and here's our Layout Router. And you can see that we initialize some files, and we take care of routes for authentication right here. And we do a whole bunch of other stuff that you can just read the source code and kind of see. But the important thing is that once authentication is done, we kick off the rest of the modules right here. Under content page, we start loading all the different sections of the application right here under the init content page. So here I'll jump really quick into Studio Lite, and I'll just select a campaign that I've built. And you can see that we have our timeline right here. We have the different channels, and under each channel we have content, so we can go ahead and add some content. And so what I'll do now is I'll go ahead and explain to you, just give you a broad view of how this is structured in the code. So going back to the application, if I switch to views, and these are again Backbone views, you can see that we have a campaign view. A campaign view is kind of a global file that holds just your campaign configuration. In fact, if I go over here, you can see that a campaign actually holds a reference to all the timelines, and it also holds a reference to the selected timeline. So if it holds a reference to all the timelines, then we must have a timeline object. And sure enough, if I go over here to timeline, you can see that for every timeline we actually instantiate a brand new instance of this class. So we can see if I switch all the way to the top, again you have all the description right here, and it tells you that we will create a timeline for every timeline that's part of a campaign. So if a campaign has 3 timelines, we'll have 3 instances of this timeline, and we actually hold a reference, and we're going to talk about those references in just a second. This is part of Jalapeno, but again you'll see that we'll create multiple timelines. And if I actually look in the timelines, you'll see that inside the timeline we actually will have channels. So you see right here that I hold a reference to all the channels. So sure enough, if you're familiar with the Sunny Studio Pro version, you'll know that a campaign holds timelines, timelines hold channels, and channels hold blocks like videos and images. And so we have the same structure in the application here. So if I switch into, if I look over here and I see that I have channels, that for sure we should have also a class called channel that gets instantiated. So right here we actually have a channel that will get created. So just looking, if I go ahead and search for the word channel, you can see that right here under populate channel, I actually switch over every single channel of a timeline, and I create a new channel. So holding now the control key and going to the channel file, you can see that if we go to the top of it, that we create a channel for every one of the channels that are part of the timeline. Again, just like before, we hold a reference right here, campaign timeline channel. So we actually hold a reference to the actual channel. And again, if you're familiar with the Sunny Studio Pro version, you know that channel actually hold blocks. So you can see sure enough that we have right here blocks. And if I switch over here to my controller, there's actually a folder here called blocks. And for every one of the blocks, we actually have a base class right here, block, that all the blocks get subclassed from. So we have a block image, or block QR, block RSS, block video, and we'll continue and develop more blocks as time goes by. But just so you know that we have all these blocks. And again, this is the base class for all the blocks, and you can see it right here. And so the beauty of this is that you can essentially use this code and modify it any way you like. For example, you see right here that we only have about 4 blocks that we've developed, but you actually have the power to go and develop every other single block. We don't have any special magic. Every power that we have, now you have as well, because you have access to Jalapeno. With Jalapeno, you actually have access to the entire database, and everything that you want to develop or modify or change, you can do via Jalapeno. So let's go ahead and jump into this and kind of show you how Jalapeno works. So I'll switch over here to my libraries and go to Jalapeno. And what Jalapeno is nothing more than just a whole bunch of functions that wrap around the SDK. Now remember initially in the video tutorial I showed you that we include an SDK. Now the SDK, what it does once you authenticate, it actually downloads the entire database of an authenticated user to the browser. This means that everything, all the information that you need is available to you in the browser via the MSDB, the local database, and you can modify this database. And once you modify the database, you can save the information to the remote server. The database actually and the tools around it serialize all the data, so you don't really have to worry about any of that. But even that could be difficult, because in order for you to work directly with the MSDB, the MS database, you would really need to understand some of the things. And let me go ahead and show you some of the things you would need to understand if you didn't use Jalapeno. So let me go ahead and scroll down a little bit over here. And this is, for example, get first board ID of campaign. So you can see that this is a very simple function, and what it does is it actually loops over the different primary keys, and you would need to know the database structure. But because we've created this function for you, get first board ID of campaign, you don't have to worry about the inner working of the function, what it actually does and how it does it. All you need to know is that you simply give it a campaign ID, or what we call a handle, and in return you would get the first board ID of the campaign. And this Jalapeno class is very well documented, so it explains everything, so you really can just go to the source code and read all this and understand what every function does and how it does it, and you can just see right here. But again, because we've created those functions for you, or I should say Jalapeno, we've created a layer of abstraction, so you don't have to worry about how the SDK actually works. We just give you the tools, the functions, and you call them directly and get the result that you need. And so if you look at the source code of Studio Lite, you'll see that we reference Jalapeno and we use all these functions in the application. So for example, if I wanted to modify a value, let's go ahead and look over here under structure and look at somewhere I modify a value. Here's a whole bunch of gets, so I don't want to get, I actually want a set or a move. So here's a set. So over here I'm looking at set campaign timeline channel record. So over here I'm giving it a channel ID, a key and a value, and I'm actually setting a record in the local MSDB, in the local database. Now the beauty of this is that all you have to do is work with the local database, with the MSDB. So over here, again, if you give it the right values, you can set the campaign timeline channel record, and it simply sets the value into the correct local database record. Now once you've made those changes and you actually want to save into the server, we actually take care of the serialization for you, so you don't have to serialize any data. If I go over here, you can see that I actually have a save right here. So you simply call save and give it a callback just to know when the save came back, and everything that you've modified in the local MSDB gets pushed into the remote media server, of course into the authenticated user. So all the serialization and deserialization is taken care for you, so you don't have to worry about any of that. You don't have to worry about the inner workings with SDK. The only thing that you need to really worry about is simply the different commands that are available to you through Jalapeno. Now I just want to spend a couple of minutes just explaining you the different terminology, because I think it'll be important once you start looking at the code. So a campaign, I think you would be familiar with if you know about our Sign Studio Pro and how that works. So you have a campaign right here, so nothing special. Each campaign has timelines, so you can see right here, campaign underscore timeline. You'll see that reference in the code. That will be an handle for a reference of a timeline. Campaign timeline channel, that will be a channel, as you can see right here. Again, nothing crazy about that. Then we have campaign timeline board template. So a board would be kind of like the board or the output, as you'd be familiar with it, and then the actual template would be the screen divisions that are part of that output. So again, campaign timeline board template would be this template right here. The board would be kind of like the outside frame of it. That would be something that you should be familiar with. You can see over here also campaign timeline board viewer would be the actual viewer screen division really, and channels would be all the different viewers within that board. So again, it's important that you understand this terminology, because you'll see it being repeated over and over inside Jalapeno and the code. before we were looking at the campaign, now we're looking at the different screen types. So this would be a global board. A global board is a board or a screen as you would know it through the Sunrise Studio Pro that is actually not a member of a campaign. It's kind of like a global board, because remember, the screen is actually shared. You can have many campaigns in the system and they could be using the same board or the same screen configuration, the same screen template. This would refer to a board or a global board right here under screens, and then we would have a board template just like before when we had the campaign board template, but this is at the global level at the shared version. So that will be a board template, and again, board template viewer for the actual screen division. So again, when you're working with the code, you'll see these references, and I think just by drawing this picture, I think you'll understand what we're referring to: a global board versus a campaign board. So this is important, and I think now this should make a lot more sense. Another thing I wanted to touch upon is the actual handles. So what we do is when you actually authenticate, when a user authenticate through the Jalapeno, what happens is that everything that gets serialized from the backend media server to the local databases is given a handle, and you'll be working with these handles, and you'll keep on seeing those handles when you're working with Jalapeno. Everything has an ID. A campaign would get an ID, a timeline would get an ID, a channel would get an ID, and we hold those references inside the classes. So you would see these handles, and they usually start from 0 and they go up from there. So for example, if I go back to what we were talking about earlier, the campaigns, under campaign view, and if I see over here where it says selected timeline ID, this would actually hold a reference to the actual timeline. And as I mentioned earlier, if I go ahead and search right here, you can see right here that timelines, and then we actually have an array that is actually the campaign timeline ID, again the handle I just mentioned, and then it actually references the instance of the timeline. So remember that everything has a handle that maps into the MSDB. We hold references. Timeline would hold references with their IDs. Channel would have their own IDs. Blocks such as QR, RSS, and so on would have their IDs. And all these handles or IDs, if you will, are always referenced in the code. And again, they map one-to-one into Jalapeno. So next, let's go ahead and jump into GitHub. So go to git.digitalsignage.com and press enter. And you can get the latest version of the source code from Git. You can click right here, download zip, and that would give you access to the entire solution. You can simply host it on your own website, and it will just work right out of the box. Everything should work for you. You don't need any PHP or any CGI. Simply host it, unzip the entire directory, and you should be able to start hosting the solution on your website and customize it as you will. So I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. The best place to get support and information on the SDK and the open source solution will be on our forum. Go to our website and go to the forum and go to open source digital signage. You'll find all the information here. We actually have all the links right here, so you can see exactly where to grab information and the documentation. This is again a great place to get all the assistance that you need, and just post questions there on the forum and we'll be happy to help you. So thanks for watching this video tutorial. Hopefully I didn't burn too many of your brain cells, and have a good one.